Lady Evelyn Ashdown stepped into the Cavendish ballroom with the careful grace of someone who understood that every gaze upon her was weighted and unkind. The chandeliers burned with excessive brightness, scattering gold across gowns embroidered with fortunes a family no longer possessed. She lifted her chin, though a tremor touched her mouth, betraying how swiftly gossip had traveled. Ruin outran every carriage in London, and tonight it seemed eager to parade beside her. She smoothed the borrowed silk of her gown, its once elegant hem faintly frayed. Her aunt had promised no one would notice, yet Evelyn felt every flaw as if the fabric mourned its better days. Conversations paused as she passed. Fans snapped shut. A pair of young ladies whispered behind lace gloves. She caught the phrase, "penniless beauty," followed by brittle amusement that clung to her like smoke drifting too close to the lungs. Still, she walked forward, determined not to hide. Disgrace could only deepen if she surrendered to it. And somewhere in this glittering room stood the man whose presence unsettled her more than any whisper. The Duke of Ravensshire, austere, composed, and powerful enough to shape the opinions of half the town. He had once been her father's ally, before misfortune severed every bond, leaving only a thin thread of memory and a silence she had never dared interpret. She found him near the orchestra, his broad shoulders haloed by candlelight. In profile he looked carved from winter, controlled, distant, permitting nothing, not emotion or scandal, to disturb his ordered existence. Evelyn hesitated, heart stumbling, then continued, unwilling to cower before the life she still wished to claim. A sharp voice intercepted her. "My dear Lady Evelyn, how bold you are to appear." Miss Charlotte Hemsley stepped into her path, her smile polished and cruel. "I suppose desperation emboldens the fallen." Evelyn steadied her breath. "Good evening, Miss Hemsley." "Oh, I merely observe," Charlotte murmured. "Proximity to a duke does not resurrect a family's fortune." Her gaze flicked to Ravensshire. Some doors, once shut, remained so. Heat rose in Evelyn's cheeks, but she offered no reaction. With quiet dignity she stepped around Charlotte and reached the Duke at last, though each step felt as though she moved through thickening air. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I hope the evening finds you well." He turned. For an instant something unreadable flickered in his dark eyes. Recognition, reluctance, perhaps concern, then vanished. "Lady Evelyn." His voice was low, measured. "This is neither the time nor the place." The dismissal stung more than Charlotte's barbs. "I merely offered a greeting, Your Grace." "Do not question me," he said, quietly but with unmistakable authority. She froze, breath caught. His jaw tightened, as though he regretted the severity, but he did not amend it. A faint line appeared at his brow, as if he warred with impulses he refused to name. Before she could speak, a servant hurried past with a tray stacked with crystal. A gentleman retreating from the dance floor collided with him, sending wine arcing through the air. The crimson splash struck Evelyn's gown, blooming across the pale silk like a cruel stain. Gasps rippled. Charlotte's delighted whisper reached her. "How perfectly unfortunate." Evelyn pressed her palm to the soaked fabric, the cold sinking into her skin. The ballroom blurred into a smear of colors and murmurs. She bowed her head briefly, voice frayed. "Excuse me." She slipped toward the terrace, holding her dignity by its thinning threads. The night met her with fine rain drifting from a brooding sky. She stepped beneath an archway, breath trembling. The garden stretched before her, washed in moonlit mist. Wet roses scented the air, soft where the ballroom had been merciless. Her ruin felt complete, not only financial but personal, as though her dignity had been stripped in a single careless moment. She wished, just for a heartbeat, for the comforting solidity of her father's voice, long silenced. She did not hear the door open, but she sensed him. The Duke's presence altered the air, lending it a charged stillness. He stood behind her, rain catching in the folds of his dark coat. Neither spoke at first, the space between them taut with things unspoken. "Lady Evelyn," he said, voice lower now, "you should not stand in the rain." She lifted her chin, pride her only shield. "I find it preferable to the warmth of that room." His gaze dropped to the ruined silk clinging to her. Something fierce tightened in his expression before he masked it. "I did not intend." He stopped, as if apology violated some rule he lived by, as though the word itself might unmake him. "You made yourself clear," she replied. He stepped closer, his nearness warming the damp air. "There are matters you do not understand." "Indeed," she said. "I fail to see why a greeting warranted reprimand." His eyes shadowed. "Because your presence places you at risk." The admission escaped him like a truth forced past restraint. Rain whispered around them, the only witness to words neither should have spoken. Evelyn's breath caught. "At risk of what, Your Grace?" He hesitated, lips parting, then closing. Vulnerability flickered across his features before he turned away slightly, as though proximity itself threatened him. A drop of rain slid down his temple, tracing the tension carved into him. "Return inside," he said. "You must trust me." "Trust is not commanded," she answered. He did not reply. They stood suspended in the rain's soft veil, two figures bound by something neither dared name. Then he turned sharply toward the door. Lightning flashed, illuminating the conflicted set of his shoulders. He paused, fingers tightening on the handle, as though a battle raged within him, duty against something far more dangerous. And Evelyn suddenly understood. He did not fear her presence in society. He feared his response to her. It was the one thing the Duke of Ravensshire had never controlled, and tonight, beneath the rain, it threatened to undo them both. At all, morning light crept through the thin curtains of Evelyn's modest room, illuminating the gown she had scrubbed late into the night, its silk still bearing a faint blush of the humiliating stain. She sat at her small writing desk, trying to steady herself after the chaos of the previous evening, when a soft knock broke the quiet. Outside lay a parcel wrapped in deep green paper, tied with a single ivory ribbon. No note, no seal, only an unfamiliar weight that made her pulse shift with wary curiosity. She untied the ribbon, revealing a delicately pressed white camellia tucked inside a slim volume of Byron's poems. The flower's pale petals held a whisper of care too intimate to be accidental. A tremor of suspicion moved through her. There was only one man in London whose gravity could summon such unexpected tenderness, yet the thought seemed too implausible to entertain. Evelyn traced the camellia's stem, feeling a reluctant warmth unfurl through her despite her better judgment. She knew how swiftly society twisted innocence into scandal, how a single misinterpreted gesture could ruin a woman entirely. Still, she slipped the flower into the pages of the book and held it against her heart as though the gesture itself offered a moment of stolen refuge. Her aunt knocked, then entered, tutting at the sight of the parcel. "Rumors already circulated," she said, "about Evelyn lingering too near the Duke after her unfortunate accident." Evelyn felt her throat tighten, for she had done nothing improper, yet truth rarely mattered when gossip circulated with the speed of wildfire. She stared at the camellia again, wondering whether it was a balm or blade. If Ravensshire had sent it, why hide? And if not him, who dared offer something so tenderly suggestive? By afternoon she ventured into the Ashdown townhouse's small courtyard, the camellia safely tucked within her sleeve. London's fog curled around the wrought-iron gate, swathing the little space in muted silver. She breathed deeply, seeking clarity, when the sound of approaching boots tightened the air. The Duke himself stepped through the gate, his coat glistening faintly as though he had walked through lingering mist. Evelyn's pulse quickened. He regarded her with that familiar austerity, the kind worn by men who fear tenderness more than conflict. She curtsied, careful, poised. He bowed slightly, though his gaze did not waver. Their silence stretched, delicate and fraught, until she asked whether he had come regarding the rumors. A flicker crossed his expression, irritation, perhaps, or something softer he would never willingly reveal. He informed her coolly that he had business with her aunt, yet the answer landed with the weight of a deliberate untruth. Evelyn stepped closer, compelled by a force she scarcely understood. The Duke's jaw tightened, as though her nearness tested the edge of his restraint. She inquired, with measured courtesy, whether he knew anything of a parcel left that morning. His response came after a beat too long. He claimed ignorance, Yet his fingers curled subtly, betraying attention not aligned with indifference. A carriage rolled past on the street beyond, its wheels slicing through puddles, filling the courtyard with its fleeting rumble. When silence returned, it pressed them nearer to the truth neither dared touch. Evelyn sensed that he wished to speak but could not, as though words themselves threatened to undo him. She told him she feared becoming the subject of cruel invention, but he offered no comfort, only a warning that she must tread carefully. His tone was guarded, but something wounded clung to it, like regret sealed behind armor. Later, her aunt reported that the Duke had indeed intervened in a matter concerning the latest rumors, quashing a particularly vicious claim before it reached one of the scandal sheets. The revelation struck Evelyn with both gratitude and confusion. If he wished to protect her, why cloak his actions in distance? Why deny a kindness he need not offer at all? She paced her room, the camellia open beside the window, catching the late sun like a fragile beacon. Yet protection, she realized, did not quell whispers, it merely redirected them. Neighbors noted the Duke's visit, and by dusk, speculation danced through drawing rooms across Mayfair. Some insisted he sought to revive an old alliance between their families. Others suggested he acted from pity. But the cruelest hinted at impropriety, turning her gratitude into peril. Evelyn pressed her hand to her brow, sensing the walls of expectation closing in. As twilight deepened, she walked toward the quiet front hall, seeking air untouched by rumor. The camellia remained pressed within her sleeve, its presence both solace and burden. She paused by the window overlooking the street, watching lanterns flicker in the growing dusk. A small group of passers-by halted, whispering as they glanced toward the house, their expressions sharpened by curiosity. Evelyn stepped back instinctively, heat rising in her cheeks. To be observed so closely felt like an intrusion into a life already stripped of privacy. Yet beneath her dread stirred a reluctant yearning, the desire that someone, perhaps the very man complicating her world, might see her not as spectacle but as someone worthy of being understood. It was a yearning she scarcely dared name, one that unsettled the fragile boundaries she fought to maintain. That night, as the household settled into stillness, Evelyn prepared for bed, though rest felt impossible. She placed the camellia upon her pillow, studying its pale symmetry as though it might reveal its sender through sheer contemplation. A floorboard creaked in the corridor, followed by a soft rustle, too intentional to be a draft. She opened her door and found a single folded letter lying on the rug, addressed in a hand she recognized instantly. Bold, disciplined, unmistakably his. Her breath caught, and the world seemed to narrow to the envelope gleaming in the faint candlelight. If he had denied the token, why offer this? And what truth, at last, compelled the Duke of Ravensshire to break his distance now? Lady Evelyn held the Duke's letter as though it might warm her chilled fingers, though the air in her room lay still and cool. His handwriting, severe yet graceful, spelled her name with a formality that scarcely masked the urgency beneath it. The message was brief. He requested her presence at Ravensshire House at dusk, insisting the matter concerned her reputation and could not be delayed. No explanation, no reassurance, only the unmistakable command of a man who waged war with propriety even when fighting himself. She pressed the letter to her chest, half tempted to ignore it, half afraid of what silence might cost. Curiosity, apprehension, and an ache she tried not to name guided her as she read the message again, imagining the weight that had driven him to write it all. Dusk draped itself over London as she arrived at the Duke's estate, her carriage rattling down the gravel drive toward the austere facade lit by flickering lanterns. A storm gathered above the rooftops, low thunder rolling like distant warnings. The butler admitted her swiftly, as though instructed to expect no hesitation. She was led through a succession of dim corridors until she reached the library, a vast, oak-scented refuge filled with towering shelves and restless shadows cast by a fire burning too fiercely for the mild evening. The door closed behind her with a soft thud that echoed like a decision made. The Duke stood beside the hearth, coat removed, waistcoat slightly unfastened, as though he had paced the room and surrendered his composure. When she entered, he turned sharply, and for a moment the rigidity left him, replaced by something unguarded. He bowed. "Lady Evelyn, you came." "I had little choice," she replied, striving for steadiness. "Your letter implied urgency." "It is urgent." He gestured toward a chair, but she remained standing, unwilling to surrender any advantage. He exhaled as though her refusal tightened the air between them. "I fear my silence has placed you in danger." "Danger, Your Grace." Her voice softened, less from fear than from a need to understand the shadows in his expression. "Rumors are hardly fatal." "Not fatal," he murmured, "but ruinous." He moved closer, the firelight striking bronze across his features. "Men whose influence eclipses even mine have taken an interest in your association with me. They twist it for their own leverage. If they tarnish your name, they weaken my position in Parliament. And if they weaken me, then they strengthen themselves," she finished. "But why involve me at all? I have no power." His gaze caught hers, fierce and conflicted. "You have more power than you know." The words unsettled her. "Your Grace, you summoned me under the guise of honest explanation. Pray do not cloak truth in riddles." He hesitated, then began pacing, one hand raking through his dark hair in an uncharacteristically disordered gesture. "Very well. I shall speak plainly. I have admired you far longer than circumstances allowed. Your father's death, your family's misfortune, my obligations, none of it diminished what I felt, only made it impossible to voice." He paused, breath tight. "When I saw you last night, standing alone beneath the rain, something in me," he shook his head. "Lady Evelyn, I'm accustomed to governing myself. But with you, I feel perilously near to losing all command." She swallowed, heart hammering. "Why did you not send the camellia openly?" He stilled. "You received it." It was not a question but a revelation slipping past his guard. "You denied it," she whispered, "and I regret that denial more than I can express." His voice dropped, raw. "The gift was meant as solace. But when the whispers grew, I feared my involvement would endanger you further." Rain lashed against the windows, thunder swelling as though echoing the tumult in the room. Evelyn stepped nearer, drawn by the honesty cracking through his restraint. "Your Grace, admiration is not a crime. For a duke entangled in political warfare, it may as well be." He met her gaze with startling intensity. "If my enemies suspect I hold affection for you, they will strike at you without mercy." "And yet you summoned me here," she said. "Surely that endangers me more." His jaw tightened. "I could not remain silent. You deserve the truth." She felt the confession settle into her bones like warmth after a long winter. Yet with it came fear. Fear not of him, but of the force he struggled to contain. "What is it you want from me?" she asked softly. His breath faltered. "I do not know," he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice shook her. "I want to protect you. I want to send you away. I want to hold you at arm's length. And I want—" He broke off, turning from her as though the next words might betray them both. Evelyn approached until only a breath separated them. "Your Grace," she whispered, "look at me." He obeyed, meeting her gaze as though surrendering to a truth too large to bear silently. In that moment his hand lifted, hesitating, then hovering close enough that she felt the warmth of his palm near her cheek. He did not touch her. Restraint trembled visibly in his fingers. "If I take one step further," he said, "I will not turn back." She felt her pulse flutter with a tenderness she had long tried to deny. "Then take it," she murmured. Lightning flared, blinding the library in white. A sharp knock shattered the fragile nearness between them. The Duke's head snapped toward the door, dread slicing through his expression. "My mother," he whispered. "She must not find you here." Evelyn's breath caught as the doorknob began to turn. In an instant he seized her hand, not in passion but in urgent protection, and guided her behind the velvet curtain bordering the tall window. Shadows swallowed her as she pressed into the folds, heart racing in the charged hush. Footsteps entered. The Dowager Duchess's voice, cool and probing, drifted through the library. Evelyn felt the faint tremor of the curtain as the Duke stood before it, shielding her with composed defiance. One breath, one misstep, and every secret stirring between the two hearts would be exposed. Rumors prowled through London in the week following Evelyn's concealed meeting with the Duke, gathering shape and venom with every retelling. By the night of the Cavendish Charity Gala, her name glimmered in parlors and corridors like a lantern held over a precipice. She arrived with deliberate poise, though beneath her calm pulse lay the memory of the Duke's almost confession and the terrifying intimacy it had awakened. The ballroom glittered too brightly, as if eager to expose every secret she carried. Across the room, the Duke stood near a marble column, composed in posture yet shadowed in expression, watching her arrival with an intensity he barely concealed. Evelyn felt his gaze settle on her like a touch withheld, staring a tremor of longing she tried to suppress. But before she could gather courage to approach him, Lord Haldane, a gentleman whose charm decayed the moment he opened his mouth, intercepted her. He declared loudly that a woman of uncertain circumstances ought not linger near powerful men, especially those already suspect of harboring inappropriate sympathies. The insult hung in the air, sharp as shattered glass. Guests turned toward her, drawn by Haldane's malice and the tantalizing scent of potential scandal. Evelyn's breath tightened, but before she could answer, the Duke's voice sliced through the murmurs. "Lord Haldane," he said, each syllable cold enough to crystallize the air, "you presume too much." Haldane stiffened, unprepared for public rebuke. The Duke stepped forward, placing himself, not subtly, between Evelyn and her accuser, as though shielding her from the full weight of the room's judgment. "Lady Evelyn's character requires no defense," he continued, though the force of his tone suggested he would offer it regardless. A ripple of astonishment passed through the ballroom. Society's most impenetrable man had chosen his side, and chosen it publicly. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks, gratitude tangled with fear, for this declaration bound her fate to his more tightly than any rumor could. Haldane retreated with a stiff bow, but the damage he intended had already ignited new speculation, visible in the widening eyes and fluttering fans of onlookers. The orchestra resumed its waltz, though its graceful sway felt mismatched to the tension coiling beneath the glittering chandeliers. Then the Duke turned to her, and the room, for one suspended breath, seemed to fall away. "Lady Evelyn," he said, offering his hand with a formality that could not hide the tremor beneath it, "would you grant me this dance?" Gasps fluttered like startled birds, but Evelyn felt only the sudden quieting of her own heartbeat as she placed her hand into his. When he drew her onto the floor, the world narrowed to the rhythm of their steps and the barely there pressure of his palm against hers. He held her as though she were a truth he had refused to acknowledge, and now could no longer deny. The walls carried them in sweeping arcs, each tane drawing them closer until she felt the warmth of his breath near her temple. He spoke so softly she almost mistook his words for memory. "I meant to keep distance. I find I cannot." Her reply escaped before caution could intervene, a whisper trembling with truth, "Nor can I." But even as the confession passed between them, Evelyn felt an invisible thread tightening, desire entwined with dread. When the dance ended, he escorted her to a quiet alcove near the terrace, where moonlight spilled like silver silk across the floor. The carriage awaited outside, he explained, for he insisted on escorting her home to shield her from further scrutiny. She hesitated, knowing acceptance would only strengthen the very bond society sought to weaponize, yet longing overruled caution. In the dim glow of lanterns, they entered the carriage, its interior warm with velvet cushions and the charged silence between them. The coach lurched forward, wheels clattering over cobblestones slick with recent rain. Evelyn stared at her gloved hands, aware of how perilously close they rested to his. At last he spoke, his voice low, stripped of pretense. "I have tried to preserve your safety by keeping distance, yet every moment apart unravels what little resolve remains." She lifted her gaze, meeting the earnest turmoil in his eyes, and answered with the courage he had once denied her. "Then speak plainly, Your Grace. What is it you fear?" He withdrew slightly, as though her question pierced a place long locked away. "A choice I no longer wish to make," he said, the tremor in his voice belying the cold precision he wore before others. "Parliament will soon issue a decree binding me to an alliance that leaves no room for personal attachment." The air thickened, pressing against Evelyn's lungs. The future she had barely permitted herself to dream began to collapse inward. Before she could speak, the carriage slowed sharply as a rider galloped alongside, pounding on the door with frantic urgency. The Duke signaled the driver to halt, then opened the door as rain swept in, carrying the rider's ragged breath. "Your Grace," the messenger gasped, "the decree has passed, effective immediately." The Duke's face drained of color. Evelyn felt the world tilt as possibility itself seemed to shatter in the space between heartbeats. He dismissed the messenger with a curt nod, yet his hand trembled as he closed the carriage door, sealing them once more into that fragile pocket of darkness and flickering lantern glow. The decree, that final blow dealt by unseen hands, settled over them like a burial shroud. Evelyn reached for him, her fingertips brushing the back of his hand, a touch both accidental and necessary. He did not draw away. Instead, he turned his palm upward, capturing her trembling fingers with a reverence that fractured her composure. "It appears," he murmured, voice scarcely more than breath, "that fate has chosen for us." The words hung between them, heavy with longing and despair, moments before the carriage lurched forward toward a future neither could yet endure. Outside, thunder rolled as if echoing the turmoil within their hearts. Dawn bled pale gold across the horizon as Evelyn's carriage rattled away from London, each mile carving distance between herself and the man she loved. She had slipped away before sunrise, leaving only a brief note for her aunt, for she knew the decree binding the Duke to a political alliance would crush them both if she remained. The ache of departure hollowed her, yet she believed absence might grant him freedom, or at least spare him the scandal her presence invited. Still, as the countryside unfurled in muted greens, she felt as though she were fleeing a part of her own soul. The storm that had brooded through the night gathered again, casting the sky in bruised gray. Wind buffeted the carriage, urging haste, but Evelyn's thoughts drifted backward to the moment the Duke's hand had closed over hers. She recalled the tremor in his voice when he confessed that fate had chosen for them, and the terrible finality that had darkened his eyes. She had known then that remaining in London would only bind him further to obligations that tore at his heart. Her sacrifice, she told herself, was mercy, even if it felt like surrender. Behind her, Ravenshire learned of a departure not from society's gossip but from her abandoned note, delivered by a trembling footman. The Duke read the letter once, then again, the ink blurring as rage and grief surged through him. Evelyn had written that she could not bear to stand in the way of his duty. She wished him peace, though the sentiment was a blade disguised as tenderness. Without hesitation he mounted his horse, oblivious to the rain that lashed against him, driven by a force fiercer than any political decree. He could no longer permit duty to dictate the fate of his own heart. Evelyn's carriage slowed as it approached the old stone bridge arching over the river that marked the boundary of London's outskirts. Mist curled along the water's surface, veiling the world in soft unreality. She instructed the driver to halt, for she needed a moment to steady herself before continuing into the unfamiliar future she had chosen. Stepping onto the bridge, she breathed the crisp air, letting the wind tangle her hair. She tried to quiet her thoughts, yet every hope she attempted to silence rose again, stubborn as a heartbeat. Hoofbeats thundered through the mist. Evelyn turned, startled, just as the Duke emerged from the fog like a figure conjured from longing itself. Rain clung to his coat and darkened his hair, yet nothing in his expression suggested hesitation. He rode forward, dismounted with swift fury, and strode toward her with the intensity of a man who had cast aside every restraint. Her breath caught. She had never seen him so undone. "Why did you leave me?" he demanded, voice roughened by wind and fear. "Did you truly believe I wished freedom from you?" She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. He stepped closer, stopping only when he sensed her trembling. "Evelyn, listen to me. I have lived my entire life bowing to duty, shaping myself into a man the world could use. But I will not, cannot, forsake you." She stared at him, overcome by the desperation and devotion in his voice. "The decree binds you," she whispered. "If I stayed, I would ruin everything you have built." "The only ruin I fear," he said, "is losing you." Rain traced his cheek like a tear neither of them spoke of. If duty demands I relinquish the woman I love, then duty shall be defied. Her heart surged painfully, hope staring with frightening force. Defying Parliament will destroy your alliances, she warned. Your enemies will strike harder. Let them, he murmured, cupping her damp cheek with a gentleness that unraveled her doubts. For years I have commanded armies of obligations, but I never mastered the one truth that matters. His forehead touched hers, breath mingling with hers. I love you, Evelyn. That is my choice, mine alone. The words dissolved whatever strength she had left to resist. She leaned into his embrace, allowing herself to believe the world could bend for them, even if just this once. The storm gathered, wind howling through the arches of the bridge, but the fury around them only deepened the stillness held between their hearts. He took her hand, lifting it to his lips. Return with me. Stand beside me when I announce our union. Let the world see precisely where I stand. Tears blurred her vision, but joy warmed her through the rain. If you are certain, she whispered. I am certain of nothing, he said with a trembling laugh. Except you. Hand in hand they crossed the bridge, moving toward the life they would claim together despite the storm, unaware that a figure waited at Ravenshire House with news capable of shattering everything they had just dared to hope.